I wanted to share some photos, never before seen photos. And you can see them right on the slide here. Here's some ice climbing photos. This is Colorado. Here's this is New Hampshire, ice climbing video. Whoa. And I just wanted to know, like, is this something that you're kind of into? Because that's not you, that's me. So you'll notice, I changed my title. You know, your title is like rock climber. I don't know, so my title is now ice climber. Anyway, I'm such a hack compared to this guy, it's not even funny. But my first question, Alex, is when are you coming out ice climbing?
Oh, if you're willing to guide me, maybe I'd go. But honestly, I've always found ice climbing a little too sketchy, a little too risky.
I know.
Which kind of makes me wonder about how you manage risk.
It's so cloud. We have talked about, Alex and I have spent some time together before this, right? And we've talked about that, and I'm convinced that that's just like the professional athlete's response to the middle-aged, hack saying, like, oh, come ice climbing. Oh, that's too tough for me. I can't do it. So I think that's kind of the common response as opposed to real.
I genuinely don't like ice climbing.
Okay, fair enough.
It's cold, it's unpleasant, it's really painful, it's, and it's dangerous. I mean, it is legitimately dangerous. It's that you have all these pointy tools and you hit yourself with the pointy tools.
I give up. Okay, maybe the journey up and after the rock. What do you remember now from the climb? Like, I mean, I've probably many of you have seen the movie.
For my curiosity, how many of you guys have seen the film? Do you guys know?
Oh, wow.
Oh, cool. Thank you guys.
Great.
Yeah, so, I appreciate that.
What was important about preparing for a climb like that?
Well, I mean, I don't want to die.
Yeah. So
is it clear?
So what do you do to actually prepare to not die?
Well, so I mean, the film chronicles it pretty well, but basically I had, there's the physical preparation, the mental preparation, the route-specific preparation of memorizing the actual moves. I mean, in some ways, the whole film is a testament to the preparation. It's so I mean, to break it down a little bit more, the physical preparation is maybe the simplest. I mean, the physical training, being a strong rock climber, being physically fit, being able to handle that kind of volume of training. That's relatively simple. It's kind of the way an athlete trains for any sport. Like if you want to run a marathon, you just go out and run more and more miles until you know that you can run a marathon. And so the physical preparation was okay. The mental side of it is a little bit more nebulous though. Actually believing that I could do something like that hasn't been done before, that I haven't done before, just having this sort of self-confidence, that's a little bit more open-ended, harder to know exactly how to prepare for that.
When you say it's nebulous, do you prepare for that? Like what is that preparation to?
Yeah, so for me, part of that preparation was building up to it, was having enough volume of similar climbs.
Yeah.
And so and this is sort of an interesting behind the scenes thing with the film. So through the film, since you guys have mostly all seen it, you see a lot of different free soloing. There's a lot of like B-roll soloing shots where I'm just soloing some route and it's unnamed. There's no fanfare about it. Like the whole film builds towards El Cap. But over the course of the 2 years that we were filming, I did maybe 6 or 7 free solos that had never been done before, that were sort of cutting edge, that were like groundbreaking within the climbing community. But when they edited the film, they kind of cut all that into just like nothingness because it's all focused on El Cap, which I understand from a storytelling perspective makes a much better film. But I was like, oh, I put a lot of work into all those other climbs. I was like, oh, it's a tremendous amount of effort to do things that for the climbing community were quite significant, but ultimately just disappear into the film. But so for those that have been to Yosemite, the cathedrals, the mountains sort of on the south side of the valley, they're 5. They're 3 big cathedrals and then 2 spires. But so it's like 5 giant walls. I free soloed all 5 of those in a day, which is the first time that had ever been done. And by spending, a whole day out climbing 5,000 feet of terrain, I felt extremely comfortable a week later when I was ropeless on El Cap. I was like, oh, I've been spending a lot of time ropeless on this type of terrain. I feel very good doing this kind of thing. I mean, so, to some extent, the film doesn't even show all the preparation I put into it, just because, the camera guys literally can't move over that much terrain that quickly. I mean, you just can't document it. If you remember the film, I had a failed attempt the fall before where I attempted to free solo El Cap and then I backed off at a certain point because I was scared. I didn't quite feel up for it. A handful of factors, but basically I wasn't totally prepared. But But it was very disappointing for me at the time because, I was very close. I was almost able to do it, and I felt like I was ready to do something that I was proud of, but it just wasn't quite that. I just wasn't quite able to free solo El Cap. But so when I came down, we shot a few interviews where they're like, "How do you feel?" And I'm like, "Well, really freaking bummed, obviously, And that's all in the film. Then what's not in the film is then I got on my bicycle and I rode over to this other 1,000-foot wall that was actually the first thing I ever free soloed as a kid, basically, that got me sponsored. Like the reason I became a professional climber is a route called Astroman. So I went and free soloed that thing again, which I hadn't done in, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. And so I did that. And then I went over and repeated another 800-foot route that afternoon. And so, the film just shows it as like, oh, I had this failed attempt and, it was kind of a bummer. But then that afternoon, I free soloed the 2 hard routes that had sort of started me in my career.
So you say in the film, motivation is performance, not happiness. Well, what do you mean by that, if you expand?
Well, I just think it's important to actually achieve things. I don't know. I mean, so in the film, I mean, that's kind of a contrast between me and my girlfriend, because she's kind of arguing that a happy life is a good life. And I was sort of like, oh, at some point you actually have to achieve something in life and do something. I think the reality is obviously the tension between the two of, having a balanced life, being relatively well-adjusted and happy, but also achieving something, hopefully, or doing something useful in the world. But I don't know. I mean, I definitely have always felt a certain drive to do something in climbing. Actually, I think that maybe the better way to phrase it is that I've always felt like if you're going to do something, you may as well do it well.
Yeah.
And so, I've devoted basically my entire life to rock climbing. And if I'm going to put all my time into it, I want to do it as well as I can.
I truly believe that you enjoy it. Otherwise, you could not do the volume of climbing that you do. I mean, we just spoke to that, right?
Yeah,
you have to love it.
sure.
So I would say that your happiness is probably when you're out on a ruck, you're most happy.
Yeah, that's fair, for sure.
I'm curious, you travel a lot and all that. How do you train when you're in these types of, we talked about climbing gyms and that, I mean, all that, but how do you, what's a day in the life of training for you?
That's basically it, going to climbing gyms.
Yeah.
I train in the gym.
That's it.
But yeah. Actually, I don't run or do any normal fitnessy stuff. I mean, I just climb.
Wow.
But
no yoga, nothing.
I stretch sometimes.
Okay.
I stretch in my room. I do like general calisthenics a little bit. like workout stuff in my room, like push-ups or whatever maybe. But no, basically I just climb. And then climbing specific training, which means like hanging with weights and things like that, things that isolate your fingers. But and you see a bit of that in the film.
I'm curious. I have this thought of you walking into a random climbing gym. Do you tell people that you're going, or do you dress up, put sunglasses on?
Pull my hood as low as I can, and I walk
then,
very quickly to the back of the facility, and then I hide. I mean, climbing's an interesting sport like that in that, most sports, once you're a professional in that sport, you kind of have your own training facilities. Like professional football players don't just show up at the field and play football
right at the high school field.
Yeah.
Right.
Whereas, with climbing, everybody uses the same climbing gym. So if you want to go climb, you just show up at the gym and hang out. And so, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, in a lot of ways, I like that, though. It's a very democratic sport because everybody uses the same facilities. Everybody climbs on the same rocks. I mean, that's the beauty of El Cap and our public lands more generally is that, we all own the same parks. Anybody can go out and climb on the walls anytime they want because we each own them.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I kind of love that about climbing is if somebody wants to go climb El Cap, they can. They just drive up and they try, But it's quite hard though, and so I actually did.
There's a van leaving from the lobby today to go up there, so
that's the A16Z team
the
building excursion.
A16Z, the black van will take you to the base of El Cap, and then good luck.
I didn't actually mean free soloing it, but I meant that.
Even with ropes, whatever.
Well, yeah, but with ropes, I mean, there is no harm in trying. I mean, and tons of people, the majority of people that attempt to climb El Cap do fail. They climb the first, quarter of the wall or so, and then they come down because they have too much equipment. It's too slow. It's too hard, and they're worked. But that's awesome. I mean, that's the nature of adventure is being able to try and fail and learn from it and try again.
Going from sort of dirtbag climber to world famous athlete, what does that feel like? And have you changed along the way? Most climbers, they're called dirtbags. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I did live in a van for 12 years. So, I mean, that is kind of fair. So for me, it's been a gradual transition. I'm sure a lot of people in this room have experienced the same thing where you're just working very hard at something that you love to do, that you care very much about. And then over time, it starts to become more of a thing and you start to become better known. And all of a sudden, you're like, oh, I'm in this crazy position that I never necessarily expected to be in, but that's just the way it played out. I'm like, huh. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, at least I'm known for something that I'm proud of. You know what I mean? At least it's not some disaster or a scandal or something. Like I've worked very hard to be the best climber that I can be, and at least I'm recognized for the hard work that I put into it, and not for something else. I'm like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's better than many other paths that my life could have taken.
Yeah. So now risk versus reward. Like, where's the line on that? What do you think? And then we have a bunch of entrepreneurs in the room here. We always think about risk versus reward, going for it. I mean, you made this perfect point. Like, if you're going to do something, do it really well and go for it, right? Mm-hmm. But at what point, I don't know if you think, do you think about that, the risk versus the reward of doing any of these endeavors?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a little bit, so it's interesting. I think that as an entrepreneur, you can maybe quantify it a little bit more. I mean, or is it, I don't know. So actually, flipping it around. So from my perspective, it's all a lot more physical, a lot more internal. It's just, I kind of feel, some things seem really scary and you're like, oh, I probably shouldn't do that because it seems really, really scary. Because typically feeling fear is sort of, a warning from your body that something is dangerous. And oftentimes you should heed that warning. You should be like, oh, that's really sketchy. I shouldn't do that. And so, for climbing challenges, it is generally more internal. If for many, many years, on my to-do list was, solo El Cap, like amongst many other things I wanted to climb. But then I would drive in Yosemite, I'd look up at El Cap and be like, there is no way I'm soloing El Cap. Like, it looks completely insane. It's terrifying. And just the mere thought of it filled me with dread. And so that was a pretty clear sign that I wasn't ready, I wasn't prepared for it, and that I shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
And so I think, I don't know, I would assume that as an entrepreneur, it's maybe a little bit less physical like that, a little bit less of a gut feeling, and maybe a little bit more quantifiable. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, it is, but there are big goals, right? And sometimes, sometimes I see, and we all have been here, where you get so invested in the goal that the risk becomes too high, right? You create some objective, it might be too high, and you go, you put too much risk behind it, right? And I'm wondering if that happens in these cases. But I guess when you said,
you mean like if you build the goal up too big and then you start to like go too far out on a branch, because you're like, oh,
too far,
I really
you're
want this
hanging on
goal,
a branch,
but
sawing the branch off while you're hanging on it, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, so I worried about that a little bit with El Cap because
totally.
I wanted to freestyle El Cap more than anything I've ever wanted in climbing, basically. I mean, it was a more significant objective to me than anything else I've worked toward.
Right.
And I did certainly worry that it was, too far out.
Right.
But then I don't know, the thing with climbing though is that you can just keep training, you can keep preparing. There's no time crunch, there's no pressure, there's nobody forcing me to do it one way or another. I was kind of able to work at my own pace and just keep working at it until I felt comfortable. Until I could finally look at the wall and be like, you know what, like it doesn't look that scary anymore. Like I can do this, I am ready, I'm capable, I'm excited about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of building a company, I've often associated building companies and more mountaineering and climbing as very related, right? Like you have this objective to go climb some mountain, and then there's camps along the way, and you have to prepare for it, and you go from one camp to the other. And a lot of building a company is actually similar in spirit to that.
Yeah.
Of course, it's much less physical and more mental, but there are steps along the way. And I'm wondering, like, when you think about a climb, do you break it up into little pieces and say like, hey, like I'm at this point, good, I'm done with that?
Well, it's actually not so much the point on the actual climb. Like on my actual free solo of El Cap, it wasn't that there were certain points along the way, like camps on a mountain, but there are definitely steps in the process. And I do think that if you break it down as a process, I mean, I had all kinds of tick lists and boxes to check.
Milestones.
Milestones in the preparation. So I had to memorize one certain. So when I showed up in Yosemite to start working on the potential free solo, there were 8 sections of the route that were big question marks for me. So then over the course of the 2 seasons that I worked on it, I had to isolate those 8 sections. So basically there were 8 parts of the route that were hard for me. And so I had to learn how to climb them, try to make them easier. A couple of them I actually wound up bypassing. I went around a few sections. I solicited advice from friends. I went up and cleaned up certain sections of the route. I pioneered a few variations. So in the film doesn't mention this at all because it's kind of too complicated for a Hollywood film to explain easily to a general audience. But basically a few of the parts that I climbed had never been climbed by anybody before because they just are off the normal climbing route. Like they're not where you would normally go with a rope because there's no way to protect yourself. There's nothing to clip your rope into, but it is actually physically easier to climb around some sections. So, but it took me a really long time to find those areas because it took me a whole season before my vision was even wide enough, if that makes sense. Like, so when you climb it with a rope, you normally stick to sort of a certain path because that's where you can clip your rope in for protection. But at a certain point, I realized if I don't have a rope anyway, I may as well go anywhere because either way, the rope's not helping me. And so I sort of cast a wider net and I started looking at the wall with much broader eyes. Like maybe I should be 100 feet further right, maybe I should be 100 feet further left, even though you could never be there with a rope. I was like, well, without a rope, you can go wherever you want. And so, I started looking a lot more broadly and found a bunch of interesting variations. The film doesn't dive into that stuff because it's subtle. But those are sort of the milestone, the checkpoints along the process that I think were important for me. Yeah. There was a tremendous amount of effort that went into the preparation, and then the actual climb all went pretty smoothly. It's just 4 hours of climbing, but it's freaking months and months to get there.
Yeah. I'm only smiling at 4 hours of climbing. Well, what was the original Royal Robbins? What was it, 40 days?
Well, so the first ascent of El Cap was done over 49 days, I think.
Yeah, 49 days.
Yeah, and then the second ascent was a week. And now typical parties on El Cap spend 3 to 5 days. So 4 hours is trimming it down a little bit.
Well, you guys did what?
And then partner and I last summer did 2 hours, which is the speed record on the wall. But we were climbing together with a rope and equipment and using all kinds of specific strategies to move quickly.
It's insane. What is it, 30 pitches? So it's 4 minutes a pitch.
Yeah, it is.
It's a pitch is 150 feet, roughly.
Or 100, yeah.
100,
yeah,
okay, 100, whatever. 100
yeah, but 3,000 feet of
Call it
climbing
100, 3,000 feet, 100 feet. 2 people have to go up in 4 minutes, right?
Yeah.
That's like most of us can't even run on a flat surface that quickly, let alone.
No, that's not totally true.
Okay, well, I'm embellishing slightly, but it's really unbelievable. 4 minutes a pitch for 2 people. That's 2 minutes per. 2 minutes a person.
Well,
okay,
actually,
3 minutes for the first.
No,
3.5.
each 4 because you're climbing continuously, so you're each climbing at the same time.
Okay, well, still.
But it's complicated. Speed climbing is interesting, but so the thing about speed climbing though that's interesting. This is a total rabbit hole, but I love all the different aspects of climbing.
I'm fascinated by this.
Yeah, okay. We'll just have a little moment here. But the thing about speed climbing is that if you see footage of us moving up the wall, it actually doesn't look that fast. We're not running, we're not sprinting. It doesn't look extreme, but it's incredibly efficient. We basically never stop moving. It's very, very smooth. There's no extra weight. There's no wasted movements. You just move continuously the whole time, and so you can travel up this tremendous amount of vertical terrain in 2 hours.
And do you guys protect at all, or do you go a whole?
Yeah. No, everything's totally safe. There's always gear between us. And actually, there's a film about it touring right now. It's called Real Rock. It's a climbing film festival tour that travels once a year. But so there's a 50-minute film about us doing this route. That goes much deeper into it. But over the course of it, my partner took a 100-foot fall, totally fine. 100 feet with the rope, didn't touch anything, totally unscathed. He came to the end of the rope and was like, "Oh, I hate that I always do that." And then he just swung over and just started climbing again.
Was that when you did? Was that during the 2 hour thing?
No.
Because otherwise you could have done it at 159.
Yeah, exactly.
Without the fall.
No. After the fall, I was like, should we stop? I was like,
you were trying. It was one of the times when you were trying.
Yeah, it was a practice burn. He was going a little too quickly and he slipped and 100-foot fall. But you're just like, whoa, geez. And then we each took sort of 50-foot falls as we were sort of practicing. But basically, those kinds of falls are safe if they're in the right places. Because if it's a clean, sheer wall and you're not hitting anything, it's totally fine to fall.
It's Yeah, you're right. Well, if you fall in the wrong place, not so good.
Yeah, exactly.
You hit a ledge or
exactly. But that's one of the key things about climbing though is evaluating those situations.
Yeah.
Because if you fall 12 feet and land on a ledge, you'll break both your ankles. But if you fall 100 feet and touch nothing, it's totally fine. The rope absorbs the force and you're just like, oh wow, that was crazy, and then you keep climbing again. And so, the key is to know which points are dangerous, which points aren't, and to think it through. And that was actually, since we're talking about speed climbing, a big part of our process was every time we climbed the wall, then you have to hike down. It takes say an hour and a half to hike back down. We'd spend the whole hour and a half debriefing exactly what we had done, what could we do better, where did we have gear, what was safe, what was not safe, how should we improve. And then by the time you get to the ground, you have a whole new set of strategies and ideas to use for the next round.
Right.
And so we did something like 10 or 15 attempts until we actually did the speed record.
Yeah, that's
and
awesome.
So each time, that should ring some bells, iterating, and it's the entrepreneurial spirit. Just keep working on it until it gets better and better.
Yeah. Before the film, most of the solo, people didn't know who you were really. Outside the climbing community.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Right. And you deliberately kept most things stealth. How did it feel to be filmed sort of for, not for the first, but for this very public, episode that was coming out? And, was it better to do stealth all the way up to that? Would it have been better to not do the film?
I think the film addresses that a little bit, was sort of dealing with the tension, exactly what you're describing, like making sure that you don't compromise the actual experience of the climb.
Right.
And I think that the filmmakers were pretty sensitive to that. But for those that don't know, Jimmy Chin, one of the co-directors of the film, he's also a professional climber, and he's also been in front of the camera. And so he's pretty sensitive to what it feels like to have your climbing experience compromised by the film crew. Basically, if the filmmaker is like, hold on a minute, got to change batteries, and you're just like sitting there waiting, and then they're like, okay, wait, hold on, got to change lenses now. And you're sort of like, oh, this doesn't feel like rad climbing anymore because, the filmmaker is changing my experience. So, he definitely knew that and was worried about that. And so I think they did a pretty good job of making sure that on the day of my actual climb, it went exactly the way I wanted it to.
Right.
And over the 2 years that we worked together and worked on the preparation and the filming, and over the 2 years that we shot, there were tons of times that I was like, oh my God, it's so annoying having a film crew around. But that's kind of natural, that if you're spending that much time with people, it chafes on you a little bit. But when it came time for the actual solos, like all the, I was mentioning earlier, sort of the half dozen climbs that I did to prepare for El Cap that were important to me, those were all pretty much, the way I wanted them to be. And then El Cap was exactly what I wanted. We had worked on it so much. They knew exactly where to be on the wall. They knew exactly the timing and everything. It was really dialed in.
So even that was prep.
Yeah,
that
totally.
whole side.
Well, the thing is, because they had been filming all of my practice, so I'd spent months on the wall practicing, and so they had a ton of practice themselves, getting into the positions, knowing where to have the cameras, how long it would take them to move around, who should be in which positions, So they had practiced the process of filming it as well, and so we were all extremely dialed. It really was a whole team executing at its best, at the end, and honestly, even though it's a bit of a hassle to film, it's still kind of worth it for me because, like I said, it's probably the thing I'm most proud of in climbing, and they made a freaking good movie. So when I see the film,
it's
I'm
unbelievable. The movie is incredible for sure.
Yeah, even as we shot some of the things, we kind of knew like this is the most beautiful climbing footage that's ever been shot. It's just like this is epic. Like nobody ever goes on El Cap and shoots in this style. And like as we did it, we're like, this is going to be incredible. And then and then I was lucky enough to get to see it on IMAX. It was released on IMAX twice, and like to see El Cap on an IMAX screen, I was like, this is worth it. It's a lot of work, but it's pretty freaking cool.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah,
amazing.
If you're going to have one, sort of peak life experience, and it's going to be documented by Academy Award-winning filmmakers, you're like, it's pretty cool.
Yeah,
it's like,
definitely, definitely, yeah. Do you think that free soloing, I've seen a lot of now YouTube videos of other people doing crazy stuff. Do you think it will inspire others who are less qualified to go do this and create, just a cascade of errors that happen out there?
No, I really don't actually. And that's a common question. Obviously, there's the possibility for that to happen.
Right.
In general, though, I think that rock climbing is actually getting more risk averse than it used to be. The history of climbing definitely came more from a world of outdoor adventure. And you said, actually, how long have you climbed? Like a long time, I assume, right?
Yeah, for a long time.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, so back in the day, climbing was a lot more adventurous, climbing was much more traditional. There was more down climbing involved, more adventure. There's more getting off route. The thing is that most climbers, myself included, who get into the sport now, come into it from gym climbing. And many rock climbers can spend their entire, climbing career in a climbing gym where it's completely safe, totally controlled environment.
That's true.
And so, as a percentage, far more climbers are gym climbers, indoor climbers, sport climbers, boulders, like all these disciplines of climbing that are relatively safe. And very few people are actually going outdoors and having these crazy adventures.
Yeah.
In a way that, in the 70s, climbers were all having crazy adventures.
There were no gyms.
Yeah, exactly. There were no gyms, and so that was the
there.
only way to do it.
Yeah, for sure.
I kind of represent the first generation of gym-raised climbers. Part of the reason that I am a professional climber now is because I was lucky enough to be born in Sacramento, where there was kind of this early climbing gym, and I got into it at a young age, got into climbing, and was able to bring a slightly higher level of climbing to the sport, because I grew up with a training facility indoors. But the thing is, now I'm starting to see the next generation of climbers coming out of new, mega gyms that are much better facilities, much nicer, much better training methods. And so you see kids now who are climbing at a much, much higher level. Wow. And climbing's in the Olympics next year. Yeah. It's going in a totally different direction that's much more physical performance based and much less adventurous. Yeah. And so when you say like, oh, free soloing is popular, I'm like, I don't really think so. I mean, certainly as a percentage, way more people are just climbing indoors and pushing the physical side of the sport, and not that many people are like risking their life and crazy adventures outdoors. But but then the other answer to that is that free soloing is it's hard to repeat. Like you can watch the movie, you can get inspired by it, you can get all fired up, and then you go and you try to free solo something, and you have to intentionally choose to make each movement. So you climb up 6 feet, and then you have to choose to climb up to 7 feet, and then choose to climb to 8 feet, and it's pretty freaking scary. I mean, if you're not prepared for it and you're not capable,
it's the most harrowing thing. I mean, like it's crazy.
It's not like if you watch a ski movie, you can be all fired up and be like, I'm going to jump off this cliff. Here we go. And then you point your skis, and one way or another, your skis are going off the cliff. You know what I mean? Like there are a lot of sports that, like gravity-assisted sports, you can just like watch a bunch of YouTube, get fired up, and then do it. But climbing isn't like that. I mean,
it's anti-gravity.
Yeah, it's anti-gravity. I mean, you have to choose each movement that you make, and if you're not psychologically prepared for that, you just can't. I mean, it's really freaking scary. So you do a little bit, and then you come down.
Yeah.
One way or another, you come down. whether not to be too dark.
All right, let's maybe switch to philanthropy, something that you and I have talked a lot about, and I think we both have a common interest in philanthropic good. What, the Honnold Foundation, maybe just give a little background there, how you chose the purpose of what it's doing now, explain it, and why that versus other things.
Yeah, that's fair. So technically, the mission statement of the Honnold Foundation now is supporting solar energy for a more equitable world, supporting solar. And so I basically came to that sort of in a roundabout way because, through climate expeditions, through travel, just through my experiences in the outdoors, I basically started to care more about the environment, want to do something useful to protect the environment, but sort of realized that there was no point in protecting the environment if it didn't also improve standard of living, if it didn't help the people living in those areas. Because through several different climate expeditions, specifically one expedition to Chad in the center of Africa, I kind of realized that people don't care about the environment unless they can meet their basic needs. And so I sort of felt like it was only worth supporting projects that helped with both. And so as I started to learn, as I became more aware of sort of issues in the world and traveled and experienced them a little bit more firsthand, it also sort of coincided with becoming a professional athlete, being able to make a little more than I needed. And I was living in my car at the time. My overhead was, 10, 15 grand a year. And I started making, 100 to 150. It was like, this is crazy money. Like all my friends are basically homeless people living in cars that were even smaller than mine.
That's where the word dirtbag comes in, just to be clear, right?
Well, yeah, basically. But so I started donating a third of my income through the foundation to environmental projects because I was like, this is still an absurd amount of wealth for me. Like I don't need all this. Like I can give a third for sure. And so when I started looking up environmental projects, basically the ones that had the biggest human impact always wound up being solar. And so after 5 or 6 years of donating that money through a donor-advised fund through the Tides Foundation, for anyone who's actually in philanthropy, then in the last two years or so, sort of in preparation for the film being released, I realized that we needed, I hired an executive director, have a board, like made it all a lot more official and started to take it a little bit more seriously, just because that really has been the big opportunity that the film unleashed, is being able to do something a lot more useful, take on more interesting projects, a bigger scope, bigger budget. The foundation has actually been able to do a lot more work. Right. That's kind of been the one unmitigated good thing from the film, because otherwise it's all like a little hit or miss. Being a famous person isn't like that cool. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's great in a lot of ways. But I think that probably the best thing about it is being able to do something useful in the world. And I think that's the point of the foundation.
I would say for me personally, and I've gotten to know you and the foundation, as inspirational to me and should be to all of us that somebody donates a third of their salary towards philanthropic well-being of the world. And it's as impressive, as the El Cap climb. But I just want to say that when I met you and learned about that, that's super inspirational. And so I think we should all take that to heart. Like, we all don't need as much as we have. And it's just a great, I think it's a great message to send to all of us who are, of course, very privileged to live where we are and all that.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, guys.
No, but that,
No, I mean, I think part of that though is just because that's always been kind of easy for me because I'm already doing the thing that I love most. You know, I'm already spending my time doing exactly what I want to be able to do, pursuing the goals that I care the most about. You know, and I was living in my van by choice because it allows me to climb as much as I want. You know, and I think that when you're living exactly the way that you want to be living, it's easy to give away what you don't need because, you know, you're already on exactly the path that you want.
Yeah. The projects that the foundation does, how do you decide on them? And then do you ever run into different cultures that may not, like you go in and it's like, well, we don't really want this, or, you know, how do you agree with the community to actually get something done?
Okay, so there are a couple parts to that. So one, I don't think we've ever gone in somewhere where the culture doesn't really, because the whole point is that we always support community organizations. We're only we're only supporting projects where people are already doing that kind of work. You know what I mean? Like we're just helping people do the work that they want to do. And part of that was because of, you know, our own constraints. Like, you know, I mean, it was just me donating money away. It's not as if I can project manage something in you know, Central Africa or something. It's just not, you know, basically we have to find partners who can do the work better and just help them do the work that they're doing. So, you know, when you ask about finding projects, I mean, the first couple of years was just me using Google and just searching, you know, like what's useful, what's going on in the world. And so the first couple of projects that I gravitated to were Grid Alternatives, if anyone's heard of them, this incredible organization in the US. Basically, I sort of focused my work domestically and then internationally because I felt like there was the environmental side and the human side. I felt like the human side, you can have a bigger impact abroad because dollars just go further. It has a bigger human impact in places where your money can do more. But the environmental side was arguably bigger domestically because you're putting bigger systems in terms of CO2 reduction, in terms of climate change. You can have a bigger impact doing sort of grid scale, you know, utility scale projects. And so I felt like, you know, for me personally, it was nice to do a combination of the two. It's like you're doing human stuff abroad, you're doing, you know, environmental stuff domestically, and you're supporting both. And now over the years, we've continued to do that, but with maybe more of an emphasis on communities, like sort of finding the right people in the right communities and supporting the right organizations. And though so far it's mostly been word of mouth, you know, meeting the right folks, chatting, you know, having conversations. And so this year we're doing our first sort of open call to solicit for potential, you know, giving grants to folks.
Okay, so people will apply.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
And that's because largely as a result of the film, you know, we've been able to fundraise so much more this year that now we actually sort of have to open call to folks who are doing the type of work that we want to support. But, you know, in the past, you know, it was pretty easy to find projects and just be like, well, I don't have that much money, so you just give it to a couple people and that's it. You run out. But now we have quite a bit more to give, so we're opening it up a little bit.
Yeah. So the living as simple as possible. Maybe you touched on this a little bit. Like, as you start to generate wealth, you bought a house now, right? Like you move out from the van.
So, actually, I'm still living in the van right now.
Okay,
but I do technically own a home.
You do have a house.
Yeah,
so
I do own a home.
But living as simply as possible, it's just sort of one of these things, like as you have more opportunity, more wealth, where does the bar of living simple versus, you know, buying more stuff or doing more things kind of play into that? And how do you draw that line?
Well, it might be kind of what I was saying a second ago, is that the things that I own are still serving a purpose, which is to do the thing that I, you know, basically to help me in my path, which is to be the best climber I can be and to be a good professional climber. You know, I own a home in Las Vegas because it's the best 4-season climbing in the country, and it's a great climbing destination, and it's just a good home base, a good space to share with my girlfriend now that I'm, you know, because I would love to, you know, perhaps have a family someday and things like that. And at a certain point, you kind of have to invest in that future as well. Mm-hmm. But I think that for me, living simply just means staying focused on the things that are most important, you know, having clear goals, working towards them, and making sure that all the other stuff isn't getting in the way.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Cool. That's great. All right. Well, with that, we are out of time here. Thank you all. Thank you, Alex. It's truly inspirational. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.